Will this Pacers team ever make sense? I think not. They crush the Dallas Mavericks to get back on track Tuesday night, over 130 points again. Offense looks great. 9 players in double figures. Boy, is there a lot to talk about on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Wednesday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, big bounce back for the Pacers. They go to Dallas. They avoid the winless road trip. They crush the currently reeling Dallas Mavericks. They needed a win for the Pacers against an okay team, not a good Mavs team, an okay team. But the Pacers needed any win against any quality of opponent, given the 2 games before it. We have a lot to talk about, a lot of contributors for the Pacers. So many, in fact, that it was the first game in the NBA this season where 9 players on one team scored in double figures. At least the Pacers tweeted that. I didn't look it up myself. I trust the Pacers with that stat with all of my heart today, and that's very impressive. Haliburton looked better. Myles Turner set the tone once again. The bench was phenomenal. So much to cover today, and I want to talk about at the end the staggering-ish, not the full stagger, but a little bit of the Haliburton Siakam stagger and what that's looking like for the Pacers. Big time win for the Pacers and a big night to get it. The Knicks lose to the Hawks, a game the Knicks would be normally expected to win, although they're extremely banged up. The Sixers lose to the Nets, a game they should win even if they're banged up, although no Maxey and no Embiid. So Pacers make up some ground. Those are the 2 teams I said keep an eye on yesterday as, to me, the 2 most likely teams for the Pacers to catch in the standings as they push on. So they picked a good night to get a win, to get back on track and make up some ground. Now tied in the win column with Miami and Philly are the Indiana Pacers, who beat the Mavs, and they look like the Pacers, right? This was something, if you listen to yesterday's show all the way through, at the end I was pulling some numbers that kind of reflected some of the stuff that I saw that looked a little off for the Pacers on this road trip, that made it look like they weren't playing like the Pacers. But at the end I said, look, I can dig up these numbers and say these things, and they all kind of add up to what we're seeing. But like you're watching it, you're seeing it. They just don't look right? Something about the way they're playing doesn't look like the way they were before, whether that's the speed, whether that's the rim pressure, whether that's the passing, whatever it was, it looked wrong. 20 assists against the Spurs was their lowest total of the season. They weren't moving the ball well. Obviously, they didn't shoot it well, which affects their assist totals, but they just looked wrong. It didn't look good, and they lost. And they had the 2 consecutive games with their lowest scoring outputs in a row entering Tuesday. Well, boy, is the Mavs' awful defense since the All-Star break the perfect antidote to all that. Pacers with 137 in this one. Yes, even playing a bad defense, I think 137 is impressive. Pacers' lowest scoring quarter this game was 31. I mean, they were just all over the Mavs. The Mavs also scored 30 at 3 quarters, but the third quarter specifically, Pacers defense stepped up, held them to 18, and that was enough because the Pacers could not be stopped. I mean, it's hard to say enough things about how effective the Pacers offensive was. And it was funny because the Mavs scored 15 points in like 4 minutes to start this game, right? Rick Carlisle takes a timeout. Pacers losing. I thought, oh boy, they've had these historic first quarters. Here we go. They're not going to recover. They're not going to be able to do this. And then they just clobbered them the rest of the way. It was a very impressive total team win for the Pacers, who needed it in the worst way. They took the lead in the middle of the first quarter, never gave it back. We're up 20 and against a 30-point Luka Doncic triple-double, and they were still able to hold on and win. Where does this start to me? It starts with a guy who is awesome against the Mavericks every time he plays them, with Myles Turner, who statistically, if you look and you saw Myles Turner had 20 points and 4 rebounds, you would not think that Myles Turner had this critical, dominant outing. But it's the timing of it that really set the tone, right? Very similar to the first Mavs game. The Mavs were, after some makes early, they were getting into the zone. They went away from it as the game went on because it wasn't working very well. But Derek Lively just does not do well against Turner. The inside-out aspect of his game, the way he's able to rein in jumpers, it's really tough for Lively, who had 2 fouls in like 90 seconds to start the game, so you can only play 15 minutes of action. And Turner, who finished with 20 and 4, again, that doesn't sound phenomenal. He had 20 points in the first half. He didn't score in the second half. He didn't need to. A lot of other guys stepped up, but he set the tone so much. He was keeping pace with Doncic from a scoring perspective. I think Luka was ahead of them at halftime, but like it wasn't that far apart or that strange to say that Myles Turner was doing all that for the Pacers early. It was so huge for the Pacers, who only had one other guy who we'll talk about in a second, be awesome in the first half, to set the tone offensively in that kind of way, because the first half was really grinded out. And that sounds silly. It was 74-70 at halftime. Like they were both scoring with ease, but it was really like a, beat the drum, grind to get ahead kind of half offensively. And Myles Turner was phenomenal, right? He made Lively pay, who had 2 fouls really early. Oh, by the way, Daniel Gafford had 2 fouls in the first half. Oh, by the way, Maxi Kleber had 2 fouls in the first half. All the Mavs bigs were in foul trouble. Lively only played 15 minutes. He finished with 3. Maxi Kleber had 3. He couldn't play very much. He only played 15 and a half minutes. Gafford was really good, and he didn't foul again after the first half, but he couldn't play as strong of defense. All those guys were negatives, and Myles Turner's start to the game and his force in the first half was a big part of that. The other guy who was huge in the first half was Ben Mathurin, who really had an under-the-radar, really solid game. His efficiency wasn't there. He was 2 for 7 on threes, though. He was really good inside the arc. He got to the line. 19 points for Mathurin. Did not put up another stat, right? This was a very last season Mathurin kind of game, but that's what the Pacers needed him to be tonight, especially in the first half, was score, right? Go score some buckets, keep this bench group going. And that was huge. He finished with 19. He had 14 in the first half. And so it was Turner and Mathurin in a game where in the second half, neither of them were particularly standoutish, that got the Pacers off the ground, and the whole team was able to finish it. But those two were so critical in the first half of this game. And let's give some credit to Andrew Nembhard. I always do this because I feel like no one appreciates what Andrew Nembhard brings to the Pacers. I see a lot of people think he shouldn't be starting. I guess if they're going to make a starting lineup change, he'd be the guy to get booted out. But he didn't miss a shot in this game. But the thing he did, once again, that makes him so valuable in matchups like this, he defends his tail off against these stars. Kyrie Irving, 8 for 19, 23 points, 3 assists. Andrew Nembhard made his life hard. Aaron Nesmith had to guard Luka. Luka played 43 minutes in this game, and he was really good. But he was 4 for 13 from deep and had a lot of pressure and turned it over 5 times. Nembhard was on him some of the time. Andrew Nembhard, specifically against the Mavs, because their backcourt's their thing, was sensational, right? His scoring wasn't like out of this world. He finished with 10 points, but he didn't miss a shot. He only had 1 turnover. He had 5 assists. He will not get enough credit for being extremely important in this game, especially in the third quarter when Luka got going. So we'll talk about the whole team effort and the Pacers looking, quite frankly, like the Pacers in the second segment. But Myles Turner and Ben Mathurin in the first half were the scorers, and Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith, really the defenders, were the defense in this game. The Pacers mixed and matched a bunch of lineups because they went 10 deep and everybody was scoring. So only 2 guys actually reached 30 minutes, and that was Haliburton and Siakam, of course. We'll talk about them in the third segment. But the way that they were able to mix and match, and the reason they were, is in the first half, they got awesome, phenomenal offense from 2 guys who didn't end up with huge statistical nights, and they got very important, critical defense from 2 guys who also didn't end up with crazy statistical nights. And that was very important that those 4 all stepped up, because that set the table for everyone else to be able to just go crazy in other ways, right? And again, 9 guys finished in double figures. We will talk about absolutely everybody, but I think those 4, that their impacts came in certain ways that weren't just like, oh, Pacers score every time down the floor. That was really important. Credit to the Pacers. They got it done. Statistically phenomenal game. They were awesome from 3. They made 18 of them, 46.2% from deep. Could they have shared some of those with the Sunday Pacers, who only made 6? If they shared 5 of them with the Sunday Pacers, both of those games would have been wins. Pacers did well on the glass. They won the rebounding battle. They only had 8 turnovers. That's freaking phenomenal. The Mavs love the possession game, and the Pacers matched them on the offensive glass and had fewer turnovers. The Mavs only had 9 turnovers. That's huge. So the shot counts were dead even, and the Pacers were more accurate because the Mavs defense isn't very good, but the Pacers took advantage of that, even in ways that teams that recently have played the Dallas Mavericks have not taken advantage of it. Giving up 137 is just laughable. The Mavs defense is just terrible. Absolutely terrible right now. The Pacers could get wherever they wanted, but credit to the Pacers because they made the shot, something they did not do when TJ McConnell, for example, was getting wherever he wanted on Sunday. You can act the quality of opponent if you want. I don't think the Pacers are in any state to talk like that. They've lost to bad teams all season. This is a mediocre team, and they crushed them. They played great basketball, and the thing that stands out, besides the performances I just described, the balance. 9 guys in double figures. Haliburton looks like Haliburton. Siakam with a wild stat line. We have so much more to talk about here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. Before we get to any of that, though, we got to talk about the lovely folks over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. And we are back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day for your second listen. Locked On Mavs. Obviously, Nick Angstad here about the opponent's perspective. Mavs not playing well right now, and they are a lot of talk from Mavs content people, podcasters, writers, whoever, about Jason Kidd coaching the team. Mavs not playing very well, firmly in 8th in the West. Pacers 8th in the East, but Pacers sweep the Mavs this year. Good for the Pacers to take care of at least a credible opponent with 2 wins, 9 players in double figures. I mean, obviously, as the Pacers shared on social media, it's the only time that's happened for a team in the league this season. I can't remember that ever. I always think 7 is impressive, right? I think 7's a good thing. That means your starters played well and 2 bench guys stepped up. That's usually enough. In this game, they scored 137 points, and their highest score was 20, right? Had Myles Turner gone 4 for 6 from the foul line instead of 5 for 6, they would have had 136 points with no 20-point scores. That's freaking crazy, right? That's kind of what the Pacers were early in the season. They kind of have shifted away from that for the better, I think, at times. But this was an unbelievable share the ball performance. And it wasn't even just that, right? 34 assists, 14 more than 2 days ago. Assume all of them are 2s. That's 28 points just from good passing, right? Like, that's a crazy difference from 2 days prior. They made 50 shots. They had 16 unassisted shots too. Again, the Mavs' porous defense played a factor in some of that. But they had 9 guys in double figures, and the one who didn't get there was not who you would probably have guessed if you said, who would be the one guy in the Pacers 10-man rotation not to get there? If you made me answer this question before this game, I'd have said Ben Shepherd, who was back from his illness. My second answer probably would have been Jalen Smith. My third answer maybe would have been Andrew Nembhard, and my fourth answer would have been Aaron Nesmith. Aaron Nesmith was the answer. 6 points for Aaron Nesmith. He only took 3 shots. He did take 4 free throws, so it was possible for him to get to 10 points. He did not. He was still +9. He played a great game. Every other player who played for the Pacers reached double figures, and in most cases also had a secondary big impact. And this is very boring. I'm not going to read the box score, but I'm going to tell you about all those things and why I think they're significant. And in some guys' cases, we'll talk about it in more detail in the second segment, including the guy we're going to start with, Pascal Siakam. 13 points for Siakam. That's, whatever. He was 5 for 11 from the field. He didn't feel that impactful offensively compared to what he's been at times for the Pacers this season, but he had 13 rebounds. 13. That is phenomenal for the Pacers. That ties his season high and ties his high with the Pacers. He had 5 offensive rebounds, which is a season high. And if you've listened to the show every day, thank you, everydayers, for tuning in every day, you know that I've talked about that a lot. Something I need to figure out if this is tracked somewhere. He is so good at rebounding his own misses. And in this game, I don't think he had any of those. I think they were all his teammates' misses that he grabbed. He was in great position for those. 6 assists, so he was still that secondary creator, +11. He was not on it shooting the ball in this game, and he was still very impactful. That double-double with 6 assists was huge. When I talked about Turner and his 20 points, we talked about Nembhard and his 10 points. I can't believe I made it 14 minutes without talking about Tyrese Halbert looking at least a little bit more like Tyrese Halbert. Some skipping, some smiling, some ooh la la plays. He had a beautiful drive in the third quarter to get to the rim with some fakes and some pirouettes. He hit some deep threes, although he also missed some deep threes in this game. He had 11 assists, and when he was in the game, the Mavs were certainly trying to defend him in a certain way, and he got the ball to the right place. That's why he was +18, despite not being incredibly accurate in this game. 19 and 11 for Haliburton. He made every single 2-pointer he took. He was 5 for 5 on twos and 3 for 10 on threes. So when he got into the paint, he was finding the right guy. He also had 6 rebounds, right? He played a really good game. He was finding the right guy. He was grabbing boards. He was taking shots that were very Haliburton-esque. One of them was very ugly, but a lot of them were very close, and a lot of them went in this game, right? He looked more like Tyrese Halbert. And look, I think that it's obviously he's not playing well. He said that, right? He said that, I forget the exact quote. I talked about it yesterday, but he even said after the Pelicans game at home that they won that, he's going through it. It's not his best stretch, but like, I think people forget about the game he had against Detroit right after the All-Star break when he had 25 and 13, where he looked so much like it's the Pistons. I hear you. He looked so much like the guy he was for all the season though. And he's still, since the break now, before today, was averaging 13 and 9 coming into this, but he had 4 like very obviously Haliburton-ish games that were pretty good and 2 duds. And so I think the 2 duds are alarming, but I think he's rounding into more form than people are giving him credit for. Maybe I'm giving him too much credit for this game. And his one bad game, the Pelicans game, was that was his worst game in the Pacers uniform, probably minus 40. But I think he's playing better than people are giving him credit for. That Pistons game looked the most he's looked like since pre-injury Haliburton. So a game like this, I think, is good if he can get the joy back, if he can keep playing. His exact quote, Jeremiah Johnson interviewing him on the court after the game on Bally, and he said, "It can't rain forever." And then another question to him, and he said, "It can't rain forever again." He said the game balances out. So big for the Pacers to see a kind of game like that from Haliburton where he plays well and plays with joy, just like looks more like Tyrese Halbert. Even if the stats aren't quite there, the threes are the big thing. He's got to start making some threes. He knows it, right? He knows it. Some people have said, "Oh, it was I've seen Jeremy Lin comps." Are you kidding me? He was like very good. He was an all-star last season. Like that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. I think he's coming out of the slump. He played very well in this game. Ben Shepherd was back. Ben Shepherd's very good. Ben Shepherd is one of the best 5 defenders on the Pacers. He made 4 threes. He had 7 rebounds. He was slamming the boards in the first half. I think 5 of those were in the first half. 12.7 boards plus 5. Obi Toppin got to his 14 points, got to his double digits by, only missing once. 5 for 6 from the field, hit 2 threes, got to the foul line. When Obi Toppin's hitting threes and hitting his shots, the Pacers bench is at its best because that means that for some reason, and he's a really interesting guy to kind of get a feel for how the Pacers are going to be defended with their second unit. Because he can score inside and out, but he very much requires an action or a drive to do it. Like he's not creating them his own way. So some teams really like to get up on him and not let him take the threes. Some teams make sure he's not going to roll to the basket after screening. He can pick and pop. He can pick and roll. In this game, the Mavs kind of chose neither. Obi Toppin just kind of had space to be Obi Toppin, and that was really good, of course, for him and the Pacers that he was able to do that. He played very well. TJ McConnell, you'll see 13 and 7 for TJ McConnell as his stat line, and you will think, that's pretty good. TJ McConnell had the most important stretch of this game to me. I typed this in my notes in all caps because I really wanted to make sure I talked about it for this game. Fourth quarter of this game started. Pacers were up double digits at the time. I can't remember exactly how much they were ahead. It was something like 15. And the Mavs started the fourth quarter in their comeback attempt. I think this is a smart idea if you're desperate and you just had an awful third quarter. The Pacers had a full bench group in. It was McConnell, Mathurin, Shepherd, Toppin, Smith. And the Mavs had starters. Luka and Kyrie were in for the Mavs. So the clear, obvious path to the Mavs, again, Luka played a ton of minutes, was they're going to try to dominate those minutes and then hope that momentum, or at least they're close enough that they can beat the Pacers starters and win the game. And instead, they couldn't make any progress in that early fourth quarter stretch. And TJ McConnell was a huge part of that. He was terrific in that stretch as an offensive engine. McConnell in the fourth quarter had 5 points and 3 assists. He was absolutely massive. They kept him in even after making some subs, the Pacers did. So he played with the starters in lieu of Nesmith for a little bit there in that fourth quarter. He earned it. He was so good in that stretch. And the Mavs made no progress cutting into the scoreboard. And then the Pacers, of course, rolled to a win. Like, that was huge. He was good all game. He made 2 threes. 13 and 7 is a wonderful stat line. But that specific stretch was huge. This was one of Jalen Smith's best games in a while. He had 11 points and 5 boards. He was 4 for 7 from the field. I don't think he's had an efficient night in a bit. He's been hurt, and that, of course, is a factor in any struggles. But he looked better in this game. He looked more like Jalen Smith, and he had a poster dunk between 2 defenders. So everybody, that was Jalen Smith's first double-digit game since before his back injury. That's his first double-digit game since the trade deadline from a scoring perspective. So big to see from him. We already talked about Mathurin. Jarris Walker and Kendall Brown get to play for the final minute of the game. But everybody who played, right, did something important. Ben Shepherd hit timely threes. Toppin punished the defense. McConnell had the biggest run of the game. Smith got going again. Haliburton got going again. Nembhard defended. Mathurin was huge in the first half, specifically the second quarter. Turner was huge to start the game. Siakam hit the glass. Nesmith defended Luka Doncic. That's how you get back on track. Everybody stepped up. Everybody reached double figures who played, except for Aaron Nesmith, who still was good. It's going to be hard to score when you're defending Luka Doncic all game. Credit to the Pacers. They needed a win. Everybody realized it. Everybody had urgency. And they get a road win over the Dallas Mavericks. Tough game. I mean, this is a tough stretch for the Pacers, right? Like coming into, they're not playing well, or they weren't entering today. But that stretch after Toronto, which they lost that game, so maybe that one should be included. That post-Toronto stretch had New Orleans, Dallas, Minnesota, Orlando, Oklahoma City as a 6 out of 7 stretch. Currently, they're 500 in that stretch. If they can get out of it with a winning record, that would be huge. But they got to win 2 of the next 3 to do it, and they could perhaps build off of this game to do it. I want to talk about one more thing. Haliburton good in this game. Siakam good in this game. Some lineups involving how those two are staggered have been very interesting to me. Those guys plus the bench. I talk about Haliburton the bench a lot. Siakam the bench is a thing they have to do if they're going to play him without Haliburton sometimes. What do the numbers behind those look like? How is that happening? What are the good and bad lineups? Let's talk about that to close out today's show. What can we learn from it? How can the Pacers learn from it? Before we talk about any of that, though, this next segment is brought to us by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you, and it is important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something. You might be thinking the same thing this week around this time. I think fans think about coaching wrong. It's very reactionary to the result of a game, if it's a coaching thing or not. Some coaches deserve the criticisms they get, but it's usually team wins, good job players. Team loses, bad job coach. I think you have to be consistent with that. I am admittedly pretty bad about that sometimes, but I think that that's something we all could strive to balance better. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than how people react to coaches of their favorite teams. And it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you are thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. So visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. You'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. And we are back. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day for your second listen. Check out Locked On Cavs. Why? The Kelseys, Travis and Jason, were in Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse to watch the Cavs beat the Celtics. That's like the hardest thing to do in the NBA right now. Credit to the Cavs for, without Donovan Mitchell, beating the Boston Celtics at home. Very cool win for the Cavs. Fun game, fun ending for Cleveland. They're a good team, man. They could be the 2 seed in the East. They are a good basketball team right now, and not at all like the one the Pacers played earlier this season. Let's close out talking about some numbers, some stuff, right? I've been talking about this a lot. I'm finally going to get to it. We keep seeing this where for stretches late in the first quarter, sometimes late in the third quarter, sometimes not, depending on how the game is going, Tyrese Halbert is in the game with some combination of like TJ McConnell, Ben Mathurin, and one front court starter and one front court bench player. And that slowly dissolves into an all 5-man bench group. And then early in the second quarter, Siakam comes in with the bench group before Haliburton comes back, right? And so sometimes the all 5 bench group is out there. Sure. It's not as much as people are saying it is, but it is out there. And it's been a good unit. The McConnell, Shepherd, Mathurin, Toppin, Smith group is a good bench group. It's worth playing all 5 of them at the same time. But also mixing in that Siakam part and that Haliburton part lets the Pacers have one of them or both of them on the floor as much as possible. You maximize the time with both of them together by getting those 5-man bench group combos out there, and you maximize your floor as a team by having those Haliburton plus bench or Siakam plus bench lineups on the floor. So that is the daily thought for the Pacers, is how do they want to manage that? When your bench is as phenomenal as it is today, you can play your 5-man bench group way more often, right? You don't have to worry about, oh, how do we stagger our stars? How do we make sure we always have somebody out there? You can play just all 5 bench guys at the same time because you're playing the Mavs and your bench is just crushing it. There is no point in trying not to. The full bench group in this game was the Pacers' second most used lineup at 6.5 minutes, and they were +2, right? If you can play all 5 of your bench guys together for 6.5 minutes and win those minutes, you should do that. You should do that every single time. The starters for the Pacers, by the way, +11 in this game. So you get the gist of what I'm saying. That's important. The fourth most used lineup from the Pacers was Nesmith, Mathurin, McConnell, Smith, Siakam, right? So Siakam, Nesmith, and 3 bench guys. That is a group they used for a decent amount of time, right? They had the Haliburton plus bench minutes that I already referred to. That is how they kind of make sure they are staggering in a way that also makes sense to have the stars out there at the same time. So let's dig into these numbers. And I specifically wanted to do it for the current version of the team. So some of these have Buddy Hield removed and some of them don't. On the season, it's only been 44 minutes. Haliburton on the floor, and none of Nembhard, Turner, Nesmith, or Siakam on the floor, right? None of those guys are on the floor. And Buddy Hield, obviously, not because he's not on the team anymore. Pacers +16 with an unbelievable over 135 offensive rating, right? That's phenomenal. If you can steal those minutes, you should all the time. And the most common group that it's been is Haliburton. Oh, Bruce Brown's included in this. I should have taken him out too. The most common group without Bruce Brown is Haliburton, Mathurin, Toppin, McConnell, and Smith. And that group is +19 in less than 10 minutes of play, right? They've gotten good results out of that group. Haliburton obviously good with anybody because he can manipulate the defense so much. I'll add in a no Bruce Brown filter as well. But that lineup being so good says a lot about why it works so well, right? You can have Haliburton and 4 bench guys out there and get good success. You remove Bruce Brown, you got 23 minutes of Haliburton plus only bench guys, and the Pacers are +23 with a ridiculous offensive rating of well over 140, which is obviously unsustainable. They're shooting an insane percentage on twos. That lineup I just described, still the most used one. The second most one is the same thing, plus Isaiah Jackson instead of Smith, and that's +15, right? So phenomenal. Haliburton plus bench groups have been. Siakam plus the bench. So Siakam on and all 4 of Nembhard, Turner, Nesmith, Haliburton off. 55 minutes for the Pacers so far. +9, 166 points on 120 possessions. I can't do mental math fast enough. That offensive rating is very good. They're shooting well from 3. They're getting good buckets inside the arc. The most used group there is Siakam, Jalen Smith, Mathurin, Shepard, McConnell, a.k.a. Siakam in for Toppin with a full bench group. That unit +7, right? Like that is very successful. McConnell, McDermott, Shepard, Toppin, Siakam +5. That is something the Pacers have been exploring a little bit. And if you were listening coming out of the break, we did the show. Biggest storylines to watch for the Pacers the rest of the way. A big one to me was the success of the bench, right? Because since the trade for Siakam, the bench had not been as good as it was early in the season. And you've seen that bounce back a little bit. Now, the problem is the starters haven't been nearly as good as they need to be to make that bench success important. But in a game like tonight, when the bench is so good, you can really see what the floor of the team can be when the Siakam plus bench units are great, when the Haliburton plus bench units are great. And of course, the starting lineup kicked butt, so the Siakam Haliburton together minutes were also great. But in general, you expect that one to be awesome. The net rating with those two on the floor is still very good. If they can find a way to stagger as effectively as possible, that also goes a long way. And it's made easier by the 5-man bench groups being so good. So the takeaway to me is every single game, it's going to take on a different life, right? If you can't play all 5 bench guys together, Rick Carlisle has to find what is the best way to stagger these guys. They should always try. I think always trying to have one of them on the floor makes a lot of sense. But there are some games like this one, like playing the Mavs, where some of it's because of the pace of the game requires resting your guys. They only had 2 guys over 30 minutes in this game, like I said. But there are some games where the 5-man bench group will work. And so that is part of the discussion and challenge for the Pacers every game building their rotation is this a game where they can steal time with all 5-man bench group? Or how do they balance the Haliburton with some bench guys units and the Siakam with some bench guys units to make sure they're as close to 48 minutes as possible with one or both of their stars on the floor? But the numbers say those guys are good buoys for the bench. They do a good job of keeping those units afloat. And of course, they play well together, especially after a game like today where they looked really good together right after 2 stinkers. So the Pacers needed that. They come back home to play the best defense in the league. We'll see how they do against Minnesota, who kicked their butt earlier this season. We'll talk about that and plenty of other stuff tomorrow with a guest. I'm waiting for a response from 2 people, but there will be somebody else with me tomorrow talking Wolves, talking some key Pacers topics for the stretch run. Of course, we'll talk about the game itself come Friday. Plenty more to come here, as usual, on the Locked On Pacers podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show and you learned something. Big Pacers win. They needed it. Lots to talk about, lots to cover. We'll probably do some deep dives on individual players going forward. I like to sprinkle these in throughout the season, but haven't had much time this year given how much has been surrounding this team. I'm on Twitter if you have questions about anything I said, at Tony R. Easton. The show is there, at Locked On Pacers, to see the topics for every single day's show. If you're on YouTube, comment. Say what you felt about something stupid I said or something good I said. Either way, thank you all for listening. Hope you had a wonderful, wonderful day. We will see you soon.